My wife ran to hug me, her face lit up with false joy, her eyes moist with fake emotion, as if I were the man in her life, as if that hug was sincere, as if nothing had happened. But I already knew. All. Every detail. Every lie. Every touch she gave another man while I was here, faithful, devoted, believing we had something real. And at that moment, seeing the fake smile crumble when she felt the coldness in my gaze, I pushed her away and released the words that would seal our fate. I know everything. I want to divorce you right now. The silence that followed was deafening. The impact of the words hit like an invisible blow. She blinked, confused, desperate, her mouth opening and closing but making no sound for a few seconds. There was no more game. There were no more excuses. She knew there was no way out. But he still tried. He tried to touch me again, as if he could erase what he did, as if it were possible to go back in time. Please listen to me, it's not what you think. You can't just throw away everything we've built. His voice shook, his eyes watered, but I saw through the act. How did I not think of this before? How did I not realize that this love was already contaminated? The evidence was there. Hidden messages, hastily answered calls, lame excuses, innocent meetings that were never just meetings. More hours at work that, in reality, were more hours in someone else's arms. The trust one had in her was replaced by a suffocating knot in my chest, a weight that crushed me with each new discovery. The initial shock gave way to anger, and the anger now turned into something even worse, contempt. Don't try to convince me otherwise. You betrayed me. You destroyed everything. There's nothing left to talk about. But of course she insisted. Because traitors never want to lose the comfort of those who truly loved them. Because those who cheat don't think about the pain they will cause, only about the pleasure of the moment. And when the truth comes out, despair takes over. She begged, cried, knelt. It was a mistake. A moment of weakness. I never wanted to hurt you. I love you, please don't leave me. Love. Love does not deceive. Love does not lie with another. Love doesn't make me spend nights awake, questioning when I stopped being enough. Love does not turn its back on years of complicity for a few moments of forbidden pleasure. The funny thing is that, before I found out everything, I loved her. God, how I loved her. I would do anything for her. I spent nights planning surprises, imagining our future, believing we had something special, something no one could break. But I was naive. I was blind. I trusted too much. And the worst? I would defend our relationship to anyone. Even when little signs started to appear, I ignored them. Friends tried to warn me, her little actions gave me clues, but I preferred to believe that she was incapable of doing something like that. How stupid I was. I, who always saw lies in other people's eyes, who was always so attentive to details in my work, didn't see the biggest one happening inside my own home. And then, the truth hit me like a cold blade to the chest. The betrayal came to light, but not in the traditional way. I didn't catch the two of them together. I didn't need to see it with my own eyes to know. Fate was cruel enough to give me more painful tests. It was our own son who revealed the truth. Yes, the betrayal came from a place where I least expected it. Like a bomb that exploded and left me floored. As if everything I knew, everything I believed in, was suddenly crumbling before me. Now, looking at her, at this woman who was once my world, all I saw was a stranger. A stranger who was still trying to reverse the irreversible. We can get through this. I love you, I always have. But I didn't want to listen anymore. Your love was a joke. A lie I carried for too long. And now I was free. The only question was, how far could this story go? What else would I discover? What else was she hiding? And could it be that, in the end, betrayal would be the worst of all? Welcome to the channel. Here, betrayal will never be romanticized or justified. The stories you will hear are fictional, but they reflect the harsh reality: infidelity destroys lives, breaks hearts and leaves deep scars. Our purpose is clear: to show the consequences of every wrong choice, every lie told, every trust broken. Get ready for an intense story, full of emotions, twists and turns, and an ending that will leave you breathless. Sit down, take a deep breath, and discover how far betrayal can lead. The setting sun dyed the sky in golden and reddish tones, reflecting its soft light on the windows of the spacious house where Noah and Emily had lived for over a decade. The residence, built with care and full of details that demonstrated their personalities, was a refuge of memories, promises and moments that seemed unbreakable. The well-kept garden displayed vibrant flowers that Emily lovingly planted, and the furniture chosen by them both over the years still carried the essence of a home that, to any outside, seemed perfect. There, surrounded by memories and routines built together, no one would imagine that anything could be wrong. Noah was a meticulous man, someone who liked stability and believed that life was made up of solid decisions, structured like a well-planned building. He worked as a financial analyst, and although his routine was exhausting, he always found time for Emily. He was never the type of man to forget birthdays or fail to notice when his wife cut her hair. He observed her in the details, in the small nuances of everyday life, in the way she sighed when she was tired, in the way her eyes sparkled when she talked about something that excited her. For him, Emily was more than a wife, she was his best friend, his accomplice, the woman with whom he wanted to share the rest of his life. Emily, in turn, was a woman with a striking presence. His easy smile and attentive gaze made everyone around him feel at ease. There was a natural sweetness to her personality, a charm that made her unique. She worked as a literature teacher and spent her days surrounded by stories, poetry and metaphors that fed her creative soul. She was always passionate about words and the emotions they evoked, and perhaps that's why she became so involved with the narrative of her own life, believing that love was a daily construction. To the world, they were an admirable couple, one of those who seemed to have found the perfect formula for marriage. Evenings at home were peaceful, filled with conversations about the day, lovingly prepared dinners and series watched on the living room sofa. There was a comfort in routine, something that made them both feel safe, but lately, Noah had been sensing something different in the air. Small details that seemed insignificant began to accumulate like grains of sand forming a silent storm. Emily looked different. Not in a blatant way, not in an obvious way, but for someone who knew her so well, any change was noticeable. She smiled less in the last few months, became lost in thought, and sometimes seemed to be somewhere else, even when she was next to him. Her touch, once spontaneous, now seemed calculated. The look that always looked for him at the most random moments now looked away frequently. When he asked if everything was okay, she answered yes, but there was something in the way she spoke, something that made Noah feel a slight discomfort in his chest. Maybe it was all in her head, maybe she was just tired from work, maybe. But he didn't like maybe. He never liked assumptions. He was always a practical man, with direct answers, and this feeling of missing something made him restless. What if it was just routine wearing down the relationship? After all, marriages went through phases. It was normal that, after so many years, the intensity of the beginning turned into a calm. But this calm was strange. That night, as he watched her from afar, he felt a tightness in his chest. She was sitting on the sofa, playing on her cell phone, and the brightness of the screen reflected in her eyes. He walked over, sat down next to her, waiting for her to notice his presence like she always did. But instead, Emily took a moment to look up. Noah. His name sounded like a surprise on her lips, as if he shouldn't be there, as if he had interrupted something. He smiled, trying to dispel that discomfort. I was just looking at you. You've been different lately. She frowned, let out a light laugh, but her eyes didn't follow the gesture. Nonsense, I'm just tired. Lots of things at school, you know. But he knew. I knew there was something more. I just didn't know what. The following days were a succession of moments that only reinforced his intuition. The messages on her cell phone that she quickly hid, the smiles that seemed more distant, the hugs that were once full of affection and now carried a touch of hesitation. Little by little, Noah began to feel like a stranger within his own marriage, as if he were next to someone he no longer knew who he was. He tried to ignore it, tried to convince himself that it was an exaggeration in his head, but the feeling wouldn't go away. And then came the day that would change everything. The one where Emily left the house more dressed up than usual, with a sparkle in her eyes that he hadn't seen in a while. It wasn't for him. And Noah knew in that instant that, sooner or later, he would discover something he didn't want. But the question that haunted his mind was, how far would this change go? What didn't he already know? And, most importantly, when love turns into something you no longer recognize, what is left after? The days followed, filled with invisible tension, a silent barrier that seemed to grow between Noah and Emily. The distance between them was no longer just an uncomfortable sensation, but a palpable reality, something that manifested itself in the lack of spontaneous touches, in the prolonged silences, in the looks that previously sought each other and now avoided meeting. Noah felt the change in every detail, from the hurried way Emily left the house to the careful way she avoided long conversations. He tried to ignore it, tried to believe that it was just a phase, that the weight of routine or daily commitments were creating this sudden coldness. But the truth, even without being said, was already there, hovering over them like a storm about to break. Noah started to notice the patterns. The outings that were previously justified with casual meetings with friends, the messages that she typed too quickly and then deleted, the long showers she took upon returning home, as if she wanted to erase something from her skin. Small details that might go unnoticed by someone distracted, but he was never an inattentive man. He just didn't want to see it. He didn't want to believe that the woman he built a life with was lying to him. However, the doubt was already there, corroding every thought, suffocating every attempt at normality. One night, while Emily slept next to him, Noah got up and walked to the bathroom. He washed his face, tried to shake off the suffocating feeling that was settling in his chest, but when he looked in the mirror, he realized that it wasn't just insecurity. He knew. Even without proof, even without a confession, he already knew. Because love, when betrayed, feels. And that strange silence, that restlessness deep in the soul, was love warning us that something was wrong. It was then that he decided to stop ignoring. I needed answers. I needed to see with my own eyes what I already felt on my skin. The next day, while Emily was at school, Noah took her laptop and tried to access her emails. The password has been changed. He tried her cell phone, but she had also started carrying it everywhere, never putting it down, not even when she went to take a shower. None of this was normal. His heart was racing, his head was buzzing with thoughts, and with each failed attempt to find concrete evidence, his despair grew. He then opted for a more accurate path. If Emily was hiding something, someone else would know. Her circle of friends wasn't that big, and if there was one thing Noah had learned over the years, it was that secrets were never kept alone. Someone knew. And someone would speak. It was in the school parking lot that he found an answer without having to ask. He was sitting in the car, waiting for Emily to come out, when he saw something that made his stomach turn. She came out smiling, but not the casual smile she gave to anyone. It was an intimate smile, directed at a man standing across the street. Noah recognized that look. The same one that once was his. The man approached, they talked quickly, their bodies leaning towards each other in a way that indicated something beyond simple friendship. Then came the ringing. The way Emily rested her hand on his arm, as if it were something natural, routine, and the low, muffled laugh that was lost in the wind. It was a raw intimacy, a closeness that shouldn't exist. Noah felt his chest tighten, his breathing became heavy. Everything he suspected now had a concrete image. There was no more room for assumptions. Emily was involved with another man. And the worst of all, she didn't seem remorseful. He didn't seem to feel guilty. He looked happy. He closed his eyes for a moment, trying to control the turmoil inside him. The blood was pulsing in his temples, his hands were shaking on the steering wheel, and the only thing he could think about was how he got there. At what point did the woman who promised to be by his side abandon that promise? Noah followed her. Cautiously, keeping his distance, trying to act rationally as his mind screamed at him to confront everything right then and there. But no. He needed to know more. I needed to see how far this betrayal went, how far Emily had the courage to take it. Night fell, and he continued to watch her from afar. She left the house once again, now more dressed up, wearing a perfume he hadn't smelled in a while. Took a taxi. Noah followed the car, keeping his distance, and then saw her enter a discreet restaurant, where candlelit dinners became the perfect setting for forbidden encounters. And there he was. The man who waited for her. Smiling like she was a gift, holding her hand on the table, looking at her the way Noah used to. The betrayal didn't need any more proof. It was there, wide open. And it was at that moment that Noah felt something inside him change. It wasn't just anger. It wasn't just pain. It was something deeper. Something that was yet to come. Noah felt his pulse resonating in every part of his body as he drove home. The silence inside the car was as deafening as the thoughts that raced through his mind. The images of Emily, sitting at the table in that restaurant, holding another man's hand, laughing, looking at him with the same intensity she once looked at him, were engraved in his mind like a scar. There were no more doubts, no room for illusions. The betrayal wasn't just a paranoid daydream, it was real, dirty, undeniable. But, contrary to what I expected to feel, anger was not the predominant feeling. It was something deeper, more corrosive. A dense void, a hole where love once existed. He felt that something even greater was coming, something that would dwarf all of this in comparison. As he parked in the garage, he took a deep breath before getting out of the car. The house was silent, surrounded by an artificial tranquility, as if nothing had happened. But he knew Emily was already inside, moving around nonchalantly, believing her double life was still intact. He walked down the hallway, feeling the weight of the decision he would make in the next few minutes. He didn't want to wait any longer. I didn't want to pretend anymore. As soon as he opened the living room door, he found her sitting on the sofa, working on her cell phone, her legs crossed, seeming completely oblivious to the storm that was about to hit. When he noticed his presence, he smiled, but it was a short smile, without warmth, as if he were measuring the terrain before deciding what action to take. He remained there, standing, facing her, letting the silence speak before he broke it. Emily frowned suspiciously, as if she sensed something was different. "What's wrong? You look strange," her voice carried a rehearsed concern, as if trying to anticipate what was coming. Noah approached her slowly, each step a reminder of how much he trusted her, how much he believed they had something real. "I know everything," the words came out firm, definitive, hitting her like an invisible blow. Her body went rigid, and he saw the exact moment her mind began to work, looking for a way out, an excuse, a way to minimize the inevitable. "What are you talking about?" He let out a low, bitter laugh, as if impressed by the audacity of the denial. "I saw you. At the restaurant. I saw the way you looked at him. The way you held his hand. The way you smiled." Emily's eyes widened for a brief second, but soon recovered her expression, swallowing hard. "Noah, it's not what you think. I can explain." He felt fury bubbling under his skin, but he kept his voice controlled. "Explain what?" "That you cheated on me. That you lied to me this whole time. That every hug, every kiss, every word of love you said to me in the last few months was a fake." Emily shook her head, getting up from the couch, her hands shaking, trying to reach for his, but he pulled back, as if her touch burned. "It's not that simple, Noah. You don't understand." He laughed again, an empty, exhausted laugh. "So make me understand, Emily. Tell me what the hell happened to the woman I loved. To the woman I would give my life to protect. She hesitated, her eyes watery, her lips parted, as if she was about to say something but unable to form the right words. Noah waited, hoped she would at least have the decency to be honest in that moment, but all that came was more silence, more hesitation. He ran his hands over his face, feeling tiredness weigh on his shoulders. I just want to know one thing. His voice was a thread, a request, a last attempt to find some shred of truth in that relationship. Was it just once? Or was it all the time? Emily closed her eyes, taking a deep breath before finally responding, and when she did, her voice was weak, barely audible. It was more than once. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Noah felt his chest tighten, as if all the air had been knocked out of his lungs. I knew the betrayal was real, but hearing the confirmation was different. It was the end. But there was still something. Something he didn't know yet. Emily looked away, her shoulders slumping, as if carrying an invisible weight. I need to tell you something. Noah didn't respond. Just waited. Emily took a deep breath, held her hands together, eyes fixed on the floor. He wasn't just a lover. The silence between them became heavy, suffocating. He felt tension course through every cell in his body. He was someone close to us. Noah frowned, feeling his stomach drop. Next how? Emily hesitated for a moment before releasing the words that would destroy everything at once. He's my ex. The one I always said I never saw again. The one I told you was in the past. The ground seemed to disappear beneath Noah's feet. He blinked, unable to process. Are you saying you cheated on me with him? With the guy you swore you never had contact with again? Emily nodded, and in that instant, something inside Noah died. The love, the trust, the life he built with her. Everything turned to dust. He no longer knew who was in front of him. She was no longer his wife, no longer the woman he built dreams with. She was a stranger. A liar. And now, all he wanted was to get out of there. Emily cried, said something about regret, about not having planned this, about it being something that got out of control. But Noah didn't listen anymore. The betrayal was already unbearable, but knowing that she was back in the arms of the man she said she hated, who always assured her he was not part of her life, was the final blow. He took a step back, feeling revulsion take over every fiber of his body. You destroyed everything, Emily. Everything, and without saying anything else, he turned and left, leaving behind a house that was no longer a home. But he still didn't know. I still had no idea what was coming. The door slammed behind Noah with a dull bang, and he felt the weight of the night envelop his body like a tide that pulled everything under. The cold breeze cut into his face, but nothing there seemed real. His mind was a whirlwind of images, disjointed sentences, memories that now seemed distant. Emily, his wife, the woman he shared years of life with, had not only betrayed him, but done it to someone who had always been in the shadows, hidden in the web of lies she had built over the years. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to find a coherent thought, but all he could feel was emptiness. A huge hole where love once existed. He walked to the car, the keys shook in his hands, but he didn't get in. I didn't know where to go. His home was no longer a home, and everything he knew, everything he built, seemed to have crumbled in a matter of minutes. He felt the pressure in his chest increase, as if he were being suffocated by something invisible. Emily was still inside, and he knew he couldn't just disappear. There were things to be said, decisions to be made. But not now. Now, he needed to breathe. He walked aimlessly down the street, his steps heavy against the asphalt. Every house around them seemed intact, oblivious to the destruction occurring within their own. It was strange how the world kept spinning, oblivious to the fact that his life had fallen apart. He picked up the phone, his fingers hesitant before dialing. But who would he call? Who would understand what I was feeling? There was no one who could repair what was broken. He felt a vibration in his pocket. He looked at the screen. It was Emily. He didn't answer. He didn't want to hear any more excuses, he didn't want to hear his voice full of guilt trying to convince him of something that was already destroyed. But deep down, I knew that running away wouldn't change anything. I would return home at some point. And when he returned, he would have to face the truth, naked and raw. When he finally returned, the room was dark, but he felt his presence there. Emily was sitting in the armchair, her eyes red and puffy, holding a glass of wine between her trembling fingers. She didn't look up immediately, as if waiting for him to say something first. But Noah didn't know where to start. The silence between them was heavier than any argument they could have had. He walked to the kitchen, turned on the tap, and splashed some water on his face. When he returned, Emily was staring at him, her mouth slightly open, as if she was about to speak but didn't have the courage to do so. He leaned against the wall, crossed his arms, keeping a safe distance. "Say what you need to say," the voice was low, controlled, but filled with an exhaustion he had never felt before. Emily took a deep breath, gripping the glass tighter. "I know nothing I say will change what happened. I know you hate me now," he laughed, a bitter, short, humorless laugh. "Hate? No, Emily. What I feel is worse than hate." She closed her eyes, the tears building up again, but he didn't have the patience for that. "Not now. If you want to apologize to me, keep it to yourself. It won't change anything." She ran her hands over her face, exhausted. "I just want you to know that I never planned this. I never thought it would happen again." He let out a heavy sigh. "But it happened. And it happened because you wanted to. Because you chose to lie to me. Because you chose to hide it." Emily stood up abruptly, as if she couldn't stand the conversation sitting down any longer. She walked toward him, hesitantly, as if she were stepping on broken glass. "Noah, please listen to me. You've always been my choice. Always. But I—" She stopped, the words catching in her throat. He stared at her, impassive. "But you what?" She opened and closed her mouth, her eyes darting away from his. "You need to know everything." He clenched his fists. "Then speak up." The silence dragged on for long seconds, and then she whispered, too quietly, as if she were afraid the words would actually come out. "He was always present in my life. Even when I said no. I never cut off contact completely." Noah's chest rose and fell with heavy breathing. "So, all this time, you looked me in the eye and said he was in the past, but it was a lie." Emily nodded, and for the first time since it all started, he felt something close to hatred. She lowered her head, her voice cracking. "I didn't want it to be like this. I tried to move on. I swear I tried. But every time something between us got difficult, I thought about him." He ran a hand through his hair, feeling the disgust take over. "So while I was trying to keep our marriage afloat, you were torn between me and him? What kind of person does that, Emily?" She sobbed, covering her face with her hands. "I don't know. I don't know what's wrong with me." Noah took a step back, as if he needed space to digest that. "This isn't just a betrayal. It means our entire life was built on a lie. You never really chose me." Emily flinched at those words, as if they were a sharp blade cutting into her skin. "That's not true," but he shook his head. "Yes, it is. And now I see it clearly." She tried to get closer again, but he raised a hand, warning her not to dare. "Don't do this. Don't ask me to understand. Don't ask me to forget." The pain in his voice was palpable, a lament that carried all the years he had dedicated to that marriage. Emily took a deep breath, hands shaking at her sides. "What now? What happens now?" He faced the woman who had once been everything to him, but who was now nothing more than a stranger. "Now. Now, you live with the weight of your choices," and without looking back, he turned, took the keys and left. This time, never to return. The night was cold, but Noah barely felt the temperature outside. His mind was on fire, boiling with everything that had happened, with everything that had been said. He walked aimlessly, his steps heavy, as if each one of them was sinking into an invisible ground that was trying to pull him down. He didn't know where to go, he just knew he couldn't stay there, he couldn't continue breathing the same air as Emily, not after everything he discovered. The pain that burned in his chest was unlike anything he had ever felt. It wasn't just anger, it wasn't just betrayal. It was the complete destruction of an illusion. For years, he believed he had built something solid, true, but now he realized he was alone in this belief. Emily was never fully his. He never gave himself up completely. Her past was present all the time, lurking in the shadows, in the absences, in the lies spoken with the sweet voice of someone who learned to deceive naturally. He continued walking, without noticing the time, without realizing how far he was already from home. His feet took him to a small corner bar, one of those places where no one asks questions, where people wallow in their own problems without looking around. He entered, feeling the smell of drink and cigarettes permeating the air, ordered a double whiskey and sat down in the far corner. The first sip went down burning, but it wasn't enough to numb the turmoil inside him. He took his cell phone from his pocket and looked at the blank screen. No calls, no messages. Emily hasn't tried to talk to him since she left home. Perhaps he knew that any attempt would be futile. Maybe she was lost in the chaos she created. Or maybe he just didn't care that much. The thought hit him like a punch. What if she didn't care? What if, deep down, Emily never loved him the way he loved her? If for her, he was always just a refuge, a safe haven, a reliable and predictable man she could return to whenever she wanted? He felt a bitter taste rise in his throat. He spent years believing that he had a happy marriage, that he had a partner by his side, but now he realized that everything could have been a sham from the beginning. The sound of glasses clashing on the counter brought him back to reality. He observed the movement around him, people laughing, loose conversations, couples exchanging complicit glances. For a second, he felt envious of those people. Of those who still believed, of those who had not yet been destroyed by the truth. He drank the rest of the whiskey and asked for another. He wanted to numb his mind, to silence the thoughts that tortured him. But he knew it wouldn't help. Nothing would erase what happened. Nothing would change the fact that his marriage was over, that the woman he loved destroyed him in a way no one else could have. He stayed there for hours, lost in time, drinking in silence, trying to understand where everything went wrong. And then, without him realizing it, his mind began to turn to something different. A future he had not yet considered. What would happen now? What would come next? Would he leave that house permanently? Would you ask for a divorce? Would you start a new life, alone? Or would Emily try to fix the unfixable? Looking at the empty glass in his hand, he realized that this decision would have to be made soon. I couldn't live forever in this limbo. He got up, his body feeling heavier than before. He paid the bill and left, feeling the cold morning wind cut his face. He looked around, trying to decide whether to go home or find another place to spend the night. But then, almost as if it were a reflex, he picked up his cell phone again. And he saw the only message Emily had sent. We need to talk. Please. He read those words several times, but none of them made him want to respond. What was there to talk about? What else could she say that wasn't another lie or a desperate attempt to fix what was beyond repair? He put his cell phone in his pocket and started walking. He didn't yet know what his decision would be. But I knew that, from that moment on, nothing would ever be the same. The sun was already starting to rise over the horizon when Noah finally found the courage to return home. Not because I wanted to, but because I needed to face what came next. Betrayal was no longer an assumption, it was no longer an irrational fear, it was an irrefutable suit. The marriage had been destroyed in the worst way possible, and now, all that was left was the dust of what he once called home. My head hurt, not just from the alcohol from the night before, but from the weight of the last few hours. Every step towards the house seemed slower, as if an invisible force was trying to stop him from walking through that door again. When he entered, the room was plunged into an oppressive silence. The dim light of dawn filtered through the curtains, bathing the room in a pale, lifeless tone. Emily was sitting on the sofa, her legs folded against her chest, her eyes fixed on a random spot on the wall. The disheveled hair, the dry lips, the expression of someone who spent the night awake. She knew he would come back, knew this moment would happen. But nothing could prepare her for the way Noah looked at her now. There was no more admiration, affection, or even anger. There was a cold emptiness, as if he no longer saw in her the woman he once loved. He closed the door behind him, placed his hands in his pockets and remained there, watching her without saying anything. Emily finally looked away from the wall and met his, but she couldn't hold her gaze for long. He took a deep breath, a shaky, brittle sound. "I didn't know if you'd come back." The voice was hoarse, almost a whisper, as if he had been holding back tears for hours. Noah remained motionless, analyzing her every movement, waiting for something he didn't even know what it was. "Did you really think I would just disappear? That I would let you deal with this alone?" His tone was dry, direct, with no room for any sentimentality. Emily hung her head, embarrassed. "I don't know what to think. I don't know how to fix this." He let out a short, humorless laugh. "There is no reparation, Emily. There is no reset button for what you did." She closed her eyes for a moment, as if absorbing the impact of the words. "I didn't want to hurt you." Noah clenched his fists, feeling control slip through his fingers. "But it hurt. And worse than that, you did it on purpose. You chose to hide it, you chose to lie. It wasn't a slip-up, Emily. It was one decision after another." Emily ran her hands over her face, trying to find an explanation that made sense, but even to her everything seemed illogical now. "I loved you this whole time. I still love you." He closed his eyes for a moment, holding back the fury that threatened to escape. "Don't talk to me about love. Love doesn't deceive, it doesn't pretend, it doesn't divide itself between the present and the past." She stood up suddenly, as if the impact of his words had reached its limit. "And you think I don't know that? You think I don't hate myself for all of this? That I wouldn't give anything to go back in time?" He stared at her, finally feeling a sliver of something that felt like pity. "But don't feel sorry for her. Pity for what they were, for what they could have been. If you really hated yourself for this, you would have stopped when there was still time. But you didn't. So tell me, Emily, was it just about him? Or was it about me? Was it about what I stopped being for you?" She opened her mouth, ready to respond, but then stopped. The truth was that she herself didn't know how to answer that question. "Everything I thought I knew now seemed like a confusing fog, with no beginning or end." Noah sighed heavily, feeling tiredness taking over his body. "I don't know who you are anymore. And honestly, I don't think you know either." Emily ran her hands over her arms, hugging herself, as if trying to protect herself from the cold coming from inside. "I just want you to understand that none of this was because I didn't love you." He laughed, a broken, painful laugh. "Understand? You want me to understand? So explain it to me, Emily. Explain to me how someone can love and still destroy everything." She looked at him, desperate, trying to find an answer that would make him see her side, but deep down, she knew there was no justification. Not one he could accept. "I wanted to feel something different. I wanted to lose myself for a moment. And then I realized that I really lost myself." The words came out like a belated confession, as if he was only now realizing the gravity of what he had done. Noah ran a hand through his hair, feeling exhaustion weighing down his bones. "So you lost me too?" Emily shook her head, her eyes teary. "Does that mean there's no going back?" He didn't respond right away. He looked at her face, the features he once knew so well, but now seemed to belong to someone else. "If there was, do you really think I could live with that? Sleep next to you knowing I was second choice. She collapsed. The tears came with force, the sobs broke the silence in the house. I screwed up, didn't I? He nodded without any hesitation. Yes. And I'm not going to be the one to fix it. She buried her face in her hands, her body shaking with uncontrolled crying. He remained there, still, watching her come undone, but feeling nothing but a vacuum. He has cried before, he has screamed, he has felt everything with brutal intensity. But now, all that was left was the certainty that there was nothing more to be said. He picked up his suitcase, which he had packed before leaving, and walked to the door. Emily looked up, her eyes swollen, desperate. Are you leaving? He stopped, looked back and released the only truth left between them. I've been gone a long time. And then, without another word, he left. Without looking back. No hesitation. He just moved on, towards a future where she no longer existed. Noah didn't look back. There was nothing left in that house that made him want to stay, nothing worth revisiting. Just rubble from a marriage he believed to be solid, but which turned out to be a sandcastle washed away by the tide of lies. The walk to the car seemed longer than ever, as if each step was a silent farewell to the man he once was. When he opened the door and got into the driver's seat, he felt the weight of everything that had happened in the last few days pressing on his chest, but, unlike other times, there was no pain. Just a deep exhaustion, an inevitable certainty that his story with Emily ended there. He turned the key in the ignition, felt the engine roar, and then accelerated aimlessly. The only thought that pounded his mind was freedom. He no longer needed to wonder, no longer needed to look for signs or pretend not to see the obvious. He was free. Emily remained sitting on the living room floor for a long time after Noah left. The silence around them felt crushing, more painful than any arguments or shouting they could have had. She always imagined that, if one day she was caught, she would have words to convince him, a way to reverse the situation, a hope that he, somehow, would still forgive her. But there was nothing but emptiness. She lost it. And the truth was, deep down, he knew this would happen from the moment he crossed the first line. At first, he believed he could balance both worlds, that he could have moments of adrenaline and, at the same time, keep his life intact. But betrayals are never just moments. They grow, transform, destroy everything in their path. Now, she was alone. He looked around the house and everything seemed lifeless. Every detail, every photo, every memory that once made her feel safe was now just a cruel reminder of the woman she had become. He picked up his cell phone, stared at the blank screen for a moment and, by reflex, dialed the number of the man who, for so long, had been his escape. He called twice before going to voicemail. He tried again, with ragged breaths, and nothing. He was no longer there. Never really was. And only now did she understand that she was never a priority for anyone. The shock of that hit like a punch in the gut. Everything he built was reduced to nothing. The days turned into weeks, and Noah started over. The change was not easy, but it was necessary. Sold the house. I no longer wanted to live in a space permeated by memories that no longer had meaning. He found a small apartment, a space of his own, where every corner was a new page, a new story to be written. The divorce happened without any major obstacles. Emily didn't fight for anything, she just signed the papers and disappeared. Noah didn't look for her. I didn't want to know how she was, where she was or what she was doing. She became a ghost, someone who was once part of her life, but who was now nothing more than a memory. Little by little, he rediscovered his own essence. He went out again, met new people, felt that the world hadn't ended because a marriage failed. And then, something unexpected happened. He met someone. Not in a cliché way, not in a dramatic way, but naturally, simply. A conversation that lasted, a connection that formed without him having to force it. It was different, light, without the shadows of the past hanging over every interaction. For the first time in a long time, he felt hope. Emily, on the other hand, experienced the bitter taste of loneliness. He tried to rebuild his life, but every step felt like a reminder of what he lost. He tried to convince himself that one day he would overcome everything, but the truth was that the guilt weighed on his shoulders every day. There was no true love waiting for her at the end of this story, there was no happy outcome. The lover went on with his life, indifferent to what happened, and she realized, too late, that it was just a passing whim. Now, the weight of choices fell on her mercilessly. Time continued, relentless as always. Noah moved on. He found happiness again, not because he looked for it, but because he allowed it. He understood that betrayals do not define who is betrayed, but who betrays. He wasn't the weak one, he wasn't the one who failed. He was just someone who trusted the wrong person too much. Emily, in turn, continued to live among the wreckage of what she destroyed. He learned, the hard way, that some choices are irreversible. Now it's up to you. What did you think of this story? Do you believe Noah made the best decision? Do you think Emily deserved another chance, or did she pay the right price for her choices? Comment below, we want to know your opinion. And if you're not yet subscribed to the channel, subscribe now for more stories like this. Here, betrayal will never be romanticized or treated as something without consequences. Until next time.